Good evening. My name is Caitlin Bell, and I'm the Gene Jones Director of Public Programs here at the Nevada Museum of Art. Welcome, and thank you for spending your Thursday evening here with us for a talk by Dr. Randall Irmis and Dr. Neil Kelley. Deep Time Sea Dragons of Nevada is on view on the third floor through January 11th of 2026. Thank you to our many sponsors and community partners who have made this exhibition a possibility. Thank you also to Dr. Irmis and Dr. Kelley for their collaboration on this exhibition. Some of the fossils they'll speak about tonight are on view just a few floors above your heads, so I encourage you to go take a look afterwards. We will take questions from all of you at the end of the lecture. We will be passing around microphones. I know no one likes to talk into a microphone, but it's important that we do so that we can capture your questions for Randy and Neil, and so that we can capture your voices on our recording. I would now like to introduce you to tonight's speakers. Dr. Randall Irmis is curator of paleontology at the Natural History Museum of Utah and professor in the Department of Geology and Geophysics, both part of the University of Utah, where he has worked since 2009. He received his BS in geology with an emphasis in paleontology from Northern Arizona University in 2004, and his PhD in integrative biology from the University of California, Berkeley in 2008. Randy's scientific research asks how animals with backbones and the larger ecosystems they lived in evolved through deep time, particularly in response to climate change and other global events. This work investigates fossil ecosystems and environments that span in age from over 300 million years old to less than 10,000 years old, and has resulted in many years of fieldwork in Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, Argentina, and Ethiopia. Dr. Neil Kelley is a paleontologist and evolutionary biologist with a special interest in extinct marine reptiles that were the top ocean predators during the Mesozoic, the Age of Dinosaurs. He has participated in fossil excavations in China and across North America, including multiple sites in Nevada, and worked in museum collections around the world. Currently, his work includes projects in Nevada, California, Alaska, and Tennessee. His research has been featured in High Country News, Smithsonian Magazine Online, and on National Pubic Radio. He completed his PhD at the University of California, Davis, and was a postdoctoral research fellow at the Smithsonian Institution before joining the Vanderbilt University faculty in Nashville, Tennessee. Please help me in welcoming Drs. Kelley and Irmis.
Got it. All right, thank you very much, Caitlin. I am pretty sure that I first met Randy at a Society of Vertebrate Paleontology conference around 2003, so 20 plus years ago. We were both naive but overly enthusiastic undergraduates, and now we're haggard old men, but it was maybe about a decade later in 2014 where we were at a different conference in Argentina, and I think, been out to Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park the year before and was all excited about working out there and started talking to Randy about some cool things that we could do, and he was into it. And so we've been collaborating on this project now for, now it's a decade. It's weird how time works. And so but I've never done anything like this with him. Doing a joint presentation is a little scary and a little exciting, and I'm just really glad to be invited and to share our perspectives about ichthyosaurs, which, most places in the world, you say ichthyosaur and people kind of give you a cross-eyed look. And in Nevada, everyone's like, I love ichthyosaurs, and that's like my favorite place to come. These are my people. So again, I'm really delighted to be here today. So I do want to start out with an acknowledgement of, first, the indigenous groups who've lived on the land for many, many years in the areas in which we work. We're really privileged to be able to work in these places. As many of you probably know, these are some of the most beautiful spots in the country, at least in my opinion. So really shout out to them. And also, everything that we're talking about today is built on the work of dozens of volunteers, other scientists, colleagues, collaborators, some of who are in this room right now, So I really appreciate all of their input and contribution to these projects that we'll be talking about today. Especially want to call out Dr. Paula Noble from UNR up there on the right, who's with us today. Dr. Paige DePaula, I should say, who I think is, according to a Facebook post, transporting medical leeches around in Edinburgh right now as part of her teaching. Yeah, scientists are weird. And Forrest and Nadine Fasig on the lower right over there, who are fossil hunters and outdoors people and all around interesting folks who are also with us tonight. And lots of other people to thank, but I'll be stuck here all day if I'm acknowledging all of them, so we'll keep moving. So we are going to kind of center Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park in this talk, although we'll kind of expand out to talk more about that. Who here has been to Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park? Wow. Awesome. Okay, well, I was going to tell you all to go, but it's a little redundant. But if you haven't gone, I strongly encourage it. It's a drive. It's out in the middle of nowhere, but it's totally worth it. Excellent hamburgers at Middlegate, too, on the way there if you want to go. And if you aren't able to, or even if you just have some time on the internet sometime, you can also do a virtual tour of the site that we put together as part of our research there, hosted at the Smithsonian website, the 3dsi.edu/enter-sea-dragon, and it'll kind of summarize a lot of stuff I'm about to tell you now, but with some cool graphics and animations. So anyways, just to contextualize a little bit, Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park is located in central Nevada, in Nye County. And of course, it's landlocked in the middle of the desert today, but over 200 million years ago, the western coast of North America went right through Nevada. And so much of the state was underwater for much of its geologic history, but particularly in this time in the Triassic. And we know that because there are massive sequences of marine rock packed with marine fossil that tell us there was an ocean here that persisted for many, many, many millions of years. And so, part of our mission is to try to kind of unlock the stories of those rocks and fossils and to understand how we got here, where we are now, from back then, right? And to try to keep everything in perspective. And yeah, there's also really cool giant ichthyosaurs too. We're getting to those guys too. But if you are a hardcore nerd and you want to dig into the science, you can check out the paper we published in Current Biology a couple of years ago. I'm happy to share copies of that with folks. I don't have paper copies with me, but I can share digital copies. So come talk to me afterwards, and I'd be happy to do that as well. Okay, well, I know you guys are all obviously ichthyosaur super fans. You wouldn't be here otherwise, so you may not need to know all of this, but I'll recap it anyways. We have Mary Anning over here on the left to thank for the discovery and recognition of the significance of these strange fossils in conjunction with her brother Joseph and other members of her family, other people who were exploring the rocks of southern England in the middle part of the 19th century. This was like a popular tourist town, and so people would come down with some spare cash and pick up souvenirs. Mary Anning, who came from a relatively impoverished background, basically supported her family by selling fossils that she picked up on the beach, and so became an expert on the fossils of southern England. And most of her bread and butter was selling things like ammonites, right? Super common invertebrate fossils that are really pretty, and there's a beautiful collection of them upstairs to take a look at. But in searching for ammonites, she would occasionally stumble upon these weird kind of crocodile-looking things. And she ultimately realized that these were a brand new to science type of animal that hadn't really been recognized before. And she had really tight connections with the scientists at the time, despite deep class divisions and all kinds of gendered politics and things that we could go into. But she had good working relationships with paleontologists. And so her discoveries made it quickly into the scientific communities and were celebrated. And she herself was recognized in her day as a very, very competent and talented fossil finder and field geologist. And you can still see the fossils that she found on display at the Natural History Museum of London. That's my kids super jet lagged. I dragged them right to the museum when we got off the plane. But they're good sports. So it's really not that much of a leap in time, really, from those first discoveries in England to the first discoveries here in Nevada just a few decades later in the 19th century, when in combination with geologic survey work that was happening around the state, a number of bones were discovered and made their way to a series of scientists who recognized that these resembled those ichthyosaur bones that were known from Europe, but were bigger and seemed a little different and warranted new names, a new genus name, Symbospondylus, which was published in 1868. I have known about these original fossils for, I guess since I started my graduate work for a couple decades. And I got super excited about maybe including them in this exhibition, and Anne was receptive to that idea, and I saw them today for the first time. I've never seen them in person before, along with the original publications describing this stuff. So definitely make a trip upstairs and look at all the cool stuff that's up there. I'll be calling out a lot more as we go. There's that long boy Symbospondylus that's kind of front and center when you first walk into the exhibit upstairs, a very large ichthyosaur, much larger and longer than the things that Mary Anning was finding. And then fast forward a little bit to the turn of the 20th century. And again, I don't need to go through all this great story because now you can go out and buy the book that tells this story in the gift shop here about Annie Alexander, this remarkable woman who was, again, sort of a self-taught naturalist, although she did attend university classes at Berkeley and got super excited about zoology and paleontology, and found a sort of partner in crime in this somewhat curmudgeonly looking guy over here, John Merriam, and they had a number of really productive field expeditions in various regions, California, Arizona, as well as Nevada, and this Saurian expedition produced much more complete remains of Symbospondylus and other ichthyosaurs, other marine reptile remains from the same areas that the 1868 fossils had been originally found in. And again, check out the book. Look at the actual stuff. Her boots and camera are upstairs along with her notebook. It's just crazy. I'm glowing. But you can also read this really nice summary of the exhibit down here put together by the University of California Museum of Paleontology. We usually just say UCMP, which she founded herself. She was a wealthy sugar heiress, actually. And then fast forward a little bit further in time. So, in the early 1900s, Berkeley went out and dragged a bunch of these big, heavy ichthyosaur fossils back and prepared them, and eventually got to the point where they're like, okay, we have enough of these. We really don't need any more big ichthyosaur fossils. We're done with it. And people would come occasionally and say, we're finding really big ones out in this new place in Nevada, and trying to get the paleontologists there interested. And the paleontologists were like, we already have big ichthyosaur fossils, we don't need more. But ultimately, this guy over here on the left, Charles Camp, decided to go check it out with a couple of other colleagues from UCMP and recognize the significance of this site, where yes, there are a lot of big ichthyosaur bones around, but not only that, they're everywhere, and in some cases, multiple skeletons concentrated together we'll look at. So it was a little bit different than what had been discovered before. Also, it turned out that these animals were from younger aged rocks, about 20 million years younger than the stuff that had been found in the middle Triassic of Nevada, and so got super excited about this new site. And this, of course, became Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park, which, again, many of you have been to, which initially was founded as a silver mining establishment. Some of the original silver mining structures are still there, and there's rumors that the miners maybe found some of these bones, maybe used the backbones as plates or bowls to eat their beans out of. Sadly, we've never been able to document that actually happened. It's a great story, though. But we do know that the locals were sort of aware of these fossils, and we're trying to raise awareness of them. And eventually the scientists came out and were like, oh yeah, this is really significant. So I'll kind of summarize a little bit of the work that was done out there. So up on the upper right, we've got a geologic map. And if you're not used to reading geologic maps, essentially the different colors here correspond to different rock layers and different rock types, which are of different age and help us to sort of orient ourselves in space and time. And then where you see the little speckled black spots, it might be a little bit tricky to see. That's basically where you find ichthyosaur fossils there in Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park or West Union Canyon. Again, they're all over the place. It's if you know what to look for, you can find them in great abundance, but you can't collect them. Just tell us if you find cool ones. So the initial area that Camp started working on was what he called Quarry 2, which is shown in these black and white photographs from a publication that Camp put out. And It's a little bit hard to see in these black and white photos. That maybe will be a little bit more clear in future photos as we look at them, but these are the remains of massive ichthyosaurs, much larger than had ever been discovered before. And not only that, it wasn't just one random ichthyosaur sitting out there in the desert. It was piles of multiple individuals stacked up next to each other in a log jam, which is a weird thing to find. So this Quarry 2 site that preserves the highest concentration of the ichthyosaur fossils at the site was ultimately protected by this historic A-frame shelter out there. The Ichthyosaur Cathedral, as the dedication over there on the right coins it. It is, I mean, truly is kind of like a spiritually holy place for me. And also has some cool disco lights on it now. So yeah, check it out. Yeah, Randy knows what I'm talking about. But it's important to reiterate that even though most visitors who go to Berlin-Ichthyosaur, hike around a little bit, go into the shelter, see these weird dusty rocks, like, that's not the full story. And that's what we discovered as we started working out there, is that really there are a staggering concentration of fossil riches at this site. And in fact, Charles Camp worked in something like 10 separate spots in the area to find different partial skeletons. And this was the other sort of most significant one, which he called Quarry 5, which produced what we call the holotype material. So anytime you find a species that's new to science, you need to identify a specimen that's going to be sort of the reference point and the name bearer. And so even though the fossils that you see out there at the park today are remarkable and really important, the ones that actually have the responsibility of holding the title and the name of Shonisaurus popularis are housed within the Nevada State Museum in Las Vegas. And so many of you have maybe been there and had a chance to see some of that. And some of those bones dug out of this quarry have been reproduced, 3D printed, and are on display upstairs as well. Really, you can see like physical evidence of all of these slides upstairs. It's pretty cool. So Camp named this Shonisaurus popularis. Shonisaurus refers to the Shoshone Mountains, named for the Shoshone tribe, lived in the area, still lives in the area, and popularis for the people. Camp really also recognized and had a bunch of help from the locals and the community of Nevada, and recognized that this was something that really should belong to the state and be celebrated by the state, and ultimately led to it being coined as the Nevada state fossil, Shonisaurus popularis. And it's not just the ichthyosaur that's the state fossil, it's this particular species of giant ichthyosaur, which is really remarkable and not found this species anywhere else on the world. There's other members of the genus that are similar, but. And just to give you a sense of scale, well, okay, the concrete mural is a little exaggerated, but it's a super big animal, and there's a person there for scale. And here's a proclamation codifying its status as the Nevada state fossil. I'm from Tennessee. Our state fossil is a clam. Charatrigonia thoracica. It's a very cool clam. I could actually talk all day about the clam too, but it's not an ichthyosaur. And of course, it has a long and wide cultural footprint, right, extending to adult beverages. Okay, well, of course, when you find a logjam of skeletons, the initial question is like, why the heck did these animals die and get all piled up in this one spot? Very normal question to ask. Definitely the question we planned to answer when we went out there. And after working at the site for a decade, we just don't know still, basically. And we realized that there was sort of a bigger story to tell, which I'll get into here. But Camp's initial speculation that this was a mass stranding event, something you see in whales today sometimes where they go up on the beach and die, isn't consistent with the geology. These rocks were deposited underwater, relatively deep water, and so these animals were living in deep water, died, and fell to the seafloor. They weren't beached up on land. Oh, there's a reference of beached whales. And so it's tempting to postulate that there might have been some kind of environmental catastrophe that might have killed a lot of these animals in a sudden event. It's possible, but we have yet to find direct evidence for this as well. Things like disease are interesting to think about, but incredibly hard to test in the fossil record, although not impossible. But so there are hypotheses out there still that we're working on, or maybe we'll get closer to an answer, maybe we never will. It's sort of like the nature of paleontology. We can always add new data to the picture, and you will also never finish the puzzle, right? And you may be familiar with this other idea that there was a hyper-intelligent giant kraken that drowned the ichthyosaurs, dismembered them, and reassembled their bones into a self-portrait. And I, in a way, sort of tested this hypothesis too, and I'll show you why I don't really think this is a very good explanation either. So a challenge with studying this site is that as paleontologists, usually what we want to do is go out, grab the fossils and collect them, bring them back to museum collections and preparation facilities where we can carefully clean them off and study them and scan them and put them in a museum and put them on display. And that's not possible here. This is an in situ fossil display. These fossils have to remain in place. And so studying them is challenging, especially when they're isolated out in the middle of Nevada and not too easy to get to. There's no shots at central Nevada, but it is a pretty remote area. And so my postdoc advisor, Nick Pyenson at the Smithsonian, had recently worked with some, what he liked to refer to as laser cowboys. These were digitization specialists who were using cutting-edge technology to make three-dimensional scans, models of fossil sites. And you can do this for fossils that are in collection and make beautiful, fully prepared 3D models, but you can also do it on site during excavation, and that allows you to collect a lot more data as you're going. And even in this case, where it's already been excavated, we realized this would be a really good tool to get high-resolution model of the site. And so we used a variety of different techniques, including laser scanning and photogrammetry, which is just basically taking two-dimensional images and linking them together. Like, nowadays, you can do this with your cell phone, which is pretty crazy. This has emerged quickly, and it will continue to develop pretty fast. But so we use that to generate a 3D model so we could really take our time studying each and every bone, identifying what it was, what is its orientation, how does it relate to the other bones on the site, and not have to spend many seasons out there, even though it's a nice place to be. And so here is what we wound up with. And again, upstairs, there's a beautifully 3D printed version of this model that's been hand painted. This is not quite as beautiful and not hand painted, but you can touch it, so I'll send this around. And so what you're looking at here isn't actually a surface, it's a point cloud. So as you're going in here, each one of these points corresponds to a spot where the laser was able to pick out on the rock and say, okay, that's a rock, that's a rock, that's a rock, or a fossil. The laser doesn't know the difference. It's our work to look at the model and say, that's a rock, that's a fossil, and then go back and check our work. Did we get it right? So here is another version of that model in color this time, and we've added additional coloring here on the bones. The bones are brown sitting on brown rocks. And so if you've been there before, you might have scratched your head a little bit and kind of cocked your head a little bit and been like, okay, I think I see some bones. And so I feel like this might be one of our greatest contributions to the whole thing, is being able to produce this nice scientifically vetted interpretation. There have been debates about how many skeletons are preserved on this, so we've made good progress on kind of constraining that uncertainty. And just to show sort of more scientific perspective on that, this from our publication down there at the bottom has a very schematic view. Basically, every different skeleton is given a different color. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 skeletons for sure. You can see over there on the right-hand side where it's all orange, that skeleton has kind of started falling down the side of the quarry, and it's possible that there's more than one animal mixed in there. That might be the case for the yellow one over there as well. It's a little bit hard to say. So, and based on the sketches that Camp made, there was a few other partial skeletons in the vicinity, so there are more than are observed and preserved there today, probably. We also measured the orientation of the skeletons and found that they're aligned, which you can kind of see visually, not perfectly, but generally speaking, the skeletons are all kind of trending from the lower left to the bottom right there. It's on a cardinal direction doesn't fully match the way I've oriented the picture here. So they're actually trending basically north-south, even though it looks diagonal on the image there. And what we see is that there's also a range of completeness to all the skeletons. Some of them have totally fallen apart and been dismembered and scattered. Some of them are still relatively articulated. And this suggests that there was some amount of time that they were sitting on the ocean floor before they were buried and preserved. Not a ton of time, but enough time for the skeletons to undergo a decent amount of decay prior to burial. So that, again, makes it a little bit hard to say, are we dealing with a rapid sudden event that killed all these things at once, or was it a really bad year where a bunch of things died in series, right, over a series of weeks or months, maybe years? Okay, the Kraken thing. So the idea was that this cluster of backbones over here on the left resembles the suckers of a giant squid, and maybe you can see that. But when you start looking around, you see that this is basically just the end state of the collapse of these vertebral columns. So, and again, you can appreciate this really nicely when you go upstairs. Land animals have to support their weight, and so our backbones lock together pretty tightly, right? When you move into the ocean, you don't really have that selective pressure, and so you tend to see simplification of those individual backbones from a more complicated interlocking structure to these disc-like things. It's kind of like a roll of certs or whatever, right? And so when that thing starts to rot and decay and the soft tissues that are holding it together fall apart, they slip out, right, and slide next to each other. And because of the orientation of the skeletons, we think there were some ocean currents that were moving things around. And so I'm pretty sure we can use non-Kraken explanations to explain the arrangement of the bones out there. But again, in our search for a better understanding of the site, we weren't just looking at the bones. We were trying to put it in context of the geology and the geochemistry. And this gets a little in the weeds, and I'll be happy to go through it with any of you who have interest. But we measured multiple different chemical indicators and found that there's really no evidence that there's some dramatic event happening when you get these ichthyosaurs preserved. So we would expect those little squiggly lines to have a giant excursion or a swing if there was some major volcanic event or something else that had totally thrown the whole system off. Major anoxia, all the oxygen left or the water or something like that. There's no real good evidence for that. Not to say some factors like that couldn't have come into play, but we can't really say it because we don't have evidence for it. We also did detailed study of the individual rock layers, making thin sections. Actually, Randy was doing most of this work, so credit to him. And if you are kind of accustomed to looking at rocks in thin section, these little arc-shaped things are all either bivalve or brachiopod shells, fossil shells. They're all kind of packed in together, again, suggesting there's been some current reworking. So these are the kinds of things that we can establish by studying thin sections of rocks, like what processes were taking place as these rocks formed. Yeah. And in our exploration of the site and studying Quarry 2 and the other quarries of camp, surprise, surprise, we stumbled on new specimens, including new articulated skeletons, which took a couple of years to get out of the ground. Here is a photogrammetry model. Again, this is a 3D model, but I've just projected it as a static image. Randy was telling me I should animate it and make it interactive. And I was like, you don't have time, Randy. But again, showing you kind of how we can document our work as we uncover these bones, right? And really understand what we're seeing and what their relationship is in the field. Because if you lose that data, then there's no way to get it back, right? Once you remove the bones from the rock layers. So it's really nice to have it. But these are big animals. They are not easy to move. They take many years to get out and prepare and study. This is just us getting that specimen, part of that specimen actually, not the whole thing, down the mountain, onto some cinder blocks, and then it's like, just carry there, just like, now what do we do? But we eventually got it into the back of that truck. I was just standing there taking pictures, obviously, but they were working hard. We found or re-found specimens that Camp had partially uncovered and then realized he just didn't have the capacity to excavate more and covered them back up. So that's cool to know. This one's upstairs, and this is the jaw of that specimen that I showed you a couple of slides ago that we got down the hill. And what's nice about this specimen, unlike basically all of the other Shonisaurus fossils that have been found at the park, was it still had nice, well-preserved teeth. And this helped to sort of solve a mystery and dispel a myth. Most of the fossils of Shonisaurus did not have well-preserved teeth. Some have even speculated that they were kind of toothless suction feeders. That's not the case. They have big, robust, nasty, cutting-edge teeth. Actually, if you look at them upstairs, it's even easier to tell than from this photo. So these were nasty, gnarly top predators. They weren't slurping up plankton or squid or anything like that, at least not exclusively. This is just a reconstruction showing Camp sort of knew this as well. He realized that there were robust teeth. They just weren't that well preserved, and so he couldn't say very much about them. So we're really lucky to have new data to bring to bear. Another really cool discovery that we made were a series of small bones. And we found some of these in the field, but some of them we actually refound or had been basically not recognized and had gone into collections of invertebrate fossils that were collected from the site. And we realized that these were probably baby ichthyosaur bones. For comparison here, we got a penny right there and the backbone of a probably newborn or embryo ichthyosaur and an adult. And again, you can see all this upstairs. And in fact, we realized that Camp also had written about embryos, kind of enigmatically. He didn't really provide any photographs or sketches. He didn't provide a ton of information about it, but he just said, like, yeah, as I was cleaning off the ribs, I started finding all these little bones. I don't know, maybe it's embryos or something. And so Paige DiPaolo, my colleague, working on collections there at the Nevada State Museum in Las Vegas, refound these, rediscovered these, and then it really was like a smoking gun, right? These are in situ fetal remains inside an adult ichthyosaur. This is the one I was alluding to that we found in collections at UCMP. It was mixed in with an invertebrate, but I looked at it and I was like, that looks like a tiny vertebrate jaw. And micro CT scanned it back at Vanderbilt and found, again, not well preserved, but the bases of teeth. That's what those colored features are down there. And even though this thing is tiny, right, there's a 5mm scale bar up there for reference, I realized they resembled very closely in shape the teeth of large adult Shonisaurus. These weird kind of infolded roots are typical of the genus, and they're also set into these separate sockets. They're different from later ichthyosaur teeth. So, sort of bringing this all together and trying to understand what we could say from our data. So again, kind of disappointingly, we don't have a clear explanation for what killed the animals that are preserved at Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park. Maybe somebody else will be able to establish this with more certainty, or maybe our ongoing work will provide more answers, but we could kind of rule out most of the other scenarios that have been proposed before at least. What we could say is that Shonisaurus fossils are just remarkably common out there, and what's weird is that that's all there is in terms of vertebrates. So there's a lot of invertebrates, a lot of ammonites, a lot of clams, but usually when we find large apex predatory marine reptiles, they have to be eating something. So we usually find fish and medium-sized or smaller marine reptiles living alongside them, a normal sort of food web structure. We have none of those. We just have the big guys, and they're little tiny babies. And no intermediate stages, right? And so I say this is the end of part one, but this sort of summarizes our interpretation of the site. We think that as many living large marine vertebrates do today, these animals potentially engaged in seasonal migrations to a birthing ground. And that's why we're finding all the embryos and the adults mixed together, but not other stuff. Why would they be going somewhere where there's not other medium-sized marine reptiles? Well, those would probably want to munch on the babies, right? So we see this actually today in gray whales that travel south to Scammons Lagoon in Baja, California. Low productivity water. There's no food for the adults. They're fasting this full time while they're having birth or giving birth. But they can avoid predators like orcas who tend to hang out in the more productive waters further north, right? And that's consistent with this setting, a warm tropical ocean. And so we think we can trace this behavior that's well established in the modern oceans now all the way back 200 plus million years ago, which is pretty cool. So that's my part. So Randy, I'll pass the mic to you.
Thanks, Neil. And I just want to echo everything Neil said at the beginning of the talk, and all the thanks to our collaborators and also to the Nevada Museum of Art for inviting us out here for this talk. And thank you for coming to this amazing evening. And I, personally, beyond the science, one of the reasons I was so excited about the potential to collaborate with Neil on this project is that Annie Alexander and Charles Camp are two of my paleontological heroes, and I've been fortunate enough to do field work in a number of different places where they've worked, where they did work, and so historically it was really cool too. I've worked in so many different places that Charles Camp worked that one of my colleagues accused me and my friends of being camp followers. So, I want to sort of step back and place in context this story of Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park and these Triassic ichthyosaurs from Nevada, and talk a bit more broadly about why this fossil record of ichthyosaurs from Nevada is so special, and why the time they lived in, the Triassic period, is so interesting. So this is the first geologic period within the Mesozoic era, and is from about 250 to 201 million years ago. And it's, among other things, the time that saw the first dinosaurs. So it's a really interesting time in Earth's history. And the Earth looked a lot different than it does now. So all the continents were together in a supercontinent that we call Pangaea. There were no polar ice caps, so this is what we call a hothouse or a greenhouse world. To give you some frame of reference, here are where the modern continents were located at the time. And so North America was much closer to the equator. And as Neil mentioned, Nevada would have been just off the coast here on the west coast of North America at somewhere between 15 to 20 degrees latitude. There were lots of other things happening during this time, like big space rocks hitting the Earth. So this is a giant impact crater in Quebec, in Canada, called Manicouagan, that happened about 215 million years ago. And there's we have other impact craters of meteorites that happened during this time. None quite as big as the one that killed off the dinosaurs, Chicxulub, that's in the Yucatan Peninsula, but still, it would be a bad day in the Triassic if you were within a few hundred miles of this impact when it happened. And as I mentioned, the climate was very different. So this is a climate model for the Triassic period, and it reconstructs temperatures in the interior of Pangaea for the summer of over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are average temperatures, so that's super hot. Along with that, you had very high carbon dioxide levels. So this is a graph of carbon dioxide estimates through time, and it looks really complicated, but I just want to focus on a couple things. One is that here's where we are today at about 400 parts per million and rising in that purple bar. The gray band here is what's predicted for the next century if we don't curtail emissions. And here's the late Triassic period. So the Earth in which the Shonisaurus and its relatives are living had very, very, very high carbon dioxide levels. So in a way, the Triassic Earth is a study system we can look at if we want to understand where we might be going in the future. It's also very much a time of transition in terms of the organisms that are living on land and in the ocean. So on land, we're transitioning from fauna ecosystems that are dominated by mammal ancestors to ecosystems that are dominated by reptiles, including the early dinosaurs you see out here on the right. But it's also the time where many of the modern groups of animals that we think of today as being so characteristic of our modern world got their start. So all these animal lineages you see up here first got their start and first evolved in the Triassic. And so I'm a bit biased, but I think, therefore, the Triassic is, one of the most important time intervals for understanding our modern world's origin. And it's not just on land, but in the ocean. It's been referred to as the Triassic Marine Revolution because you get all sorts of new, different types of animals living in the ocean at this time, including many different lineages of marine reptiles, which include the ichthyosaurs that we have so beautifully preserved here in Nevada. And so one of the things as paleontologists that Neil and I are very interested in is how are these ecosystems changing through time and how they might be similar or different to what we see today. And one of the very striking things we see when we look at different types of marine reptiles is how their body size changes through time, how they, their species get bigger or smaller through time. And so I want to walk through this a little bit, and one more graph, so I apologize here, but it's pretty simple in that the vertical axis is body size, so higher up on the plot is larger, lower down is smaller. And then this is time on the horizontal axis, and basically it's from when the group originated moving forward in millions and millions of years. And so first let's look at a group that's alive today, which Neil mentioned at the end of his part, which is whales. So whales are some of the biggest animals on Earth today. And when we look at their evolution, they sort of just get bigger and bigger and bigger through time, such that the largest whale that's ever lived is the blue whale that's alive today. We've never had whales as big as they are now. And so, that makes you wonder if we weren't affecting the ocean so much, could we have even bigger whales in the future? But ichthyosaurs show a very, very different pattern. When we look at ichthyosaurs, they get big really, really fast. Within just a few million years of the first ichthyosaur, we see these true giants like Shonisaurus. But then they start to get smaller through time. So the rest of the 2/3 of ichthyosaur evolution, they're actually much smaller than things like Shonisaurus, which is really strange and very different from what we see in whales. And so one of the questions that we've gotten interested in with the fossils like those at Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park and Symbospondylus youngorum from the Augusta Mountains, which is also on display upstairs, is what is driving these changes in body size through time? Why don't we see giant ichthyosaurs for the rest of the Mesozoic era? Well, one thing that we know that's happening right here is a mass extinction event at the end of the Triassic period. So maybe something happened at this extinction event that prevented ichthyosaurs from becoming giant in the rest of their evolutionary history. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look into sort of the evolution of body size, particularly as documented by some of the fossils from here in Nevada. So here again, we've got body size on the vertical. So there are going to be these different colored bars showing you how big a particular fossil is. And all you need to really recognize is giant is really towards the top and tiny is toward the bottom here. And then I'll show a green bar so you know sort of where you are in time. So the Triassic is, we have the middle and late Triassic here into the early Jurassic period. And so if we start out by going into the Augusta Mountains, we've already, only a few million years after the first ichthyosaurs evolved, we have some truly giant ichthyosaurs. We have Symbospondylus youngorum that is almost 15 meters long. So that's, almost, 40 feet long, something like that. So, and then you have only slightly smaller animal, Thalattoarcton, that has these giant chomping teeth for eating whatever it wants. So you already have these really large apex predators evolving, and there's no better place to study them than here in Nevada. As we move a little bit further in time, we can visit Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park and Shonisaurus, which Neil talked about in detail, is somewhere around the same size as Symbospondylus youngorum, truly giant as well. And I just have to point out that Neil Kelley is the standard scale for all giant ichthyosaurs, as you'll see in multiple photos here. But this is not the only place that Shonisaurus is found. So in the Pilot Mountains in western Nevada, there's also a huge number of Shonisaurus fossils, and they're just as big as the ones at Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park. But what's cool is that they're a little bit younger later in time. So it shows that this weird pattern of lots of giant ichthyosaurs of one species at Berlin-Ichthyosaur State Park is also present a few million years later in a different part of Nevada. And so what that means, we're really still trying to figure out. But you can get a sense here Neil's next to a bunch of different bones, and here's Kathleen, one of our volunteers, next to one of these giant dinner plate-sized vertebrae to give you a sense of scale. But it turns out Shonisaurus got even bigger later in time. So if you head up to British Columbia, there's an animal, a species called Shonisaurus sequenensis, and here is Don Brinkman from the Royal Tyrrell Museum next to the skull and the body of Shonisaurus. This is an animal reaching up to 20 meters in length. So that's, over 60 feet long. It's hard to conceive of an ichthyosaur that big. Truly gigantic. We're truly talking about a whale-sized animal here. And this is just a few million years later than the ones that are found in Nevada. And it seems like they stayed at this truly giant size for the rest of the Triassic period. So we have some fossils from France that are somewhere around Shonisaurus popularis size. We have some fossils from England that are probably similar in size to the one from British Columbia. And then we come back to here in Nevada. So we were checking out some really famous outcrops of rocks that document the end Triassic mass extinction in western Nevada. And Nadine here found an amazing fossil that we've spent the last couple of years excavating. And it is associated skeleton. These are our maps, and hopefully you can see how many ribs there are. We found lots and lots of ribs and exactly 1.5 vertebrae, but enough to tell that this is a Shonisaurus-like relative. And again, here we have standard Neil Kelley for scale. You can see individual ribs here that are, truly like this big around. They're gigantic. And what's particularly exciting about this fossil, not only is its size, but it is within 100,000 years of the end Triassic mass extinction. So for the first time, we can show that these really, really giant ichthyosaurs lived all the way up to this extinction event, and then for some reason went extinct at the extinction. And one of our colleagues, Gary McGaughey, who's now a PhD student at Idaho State University, worked on this site for his master's here at University of Nevada, Reno. And here are some of the individual ribs here, and it's hard to get a sense of scale just up on the screen, but the key thing is that this specimen has ribs just as big as the biggest Shonisaurus from British Columbia. So we're talking about an animal that's probably somewhere around anywhere from 17 to 20 meters, so a 60-foot long animal here living in Nevada. And so hope maybe we can take back the crown of biggest ichthyosaur from British Columbia there. But they're truly gigantic, and they have this distinctive cross-section that tells us this is an animal very closely related to Shonisaurus, even though we only have a few ribs. And this fossil here, you can maybe see a series of articulated ribs here. It made us very hungry for a rack of ribs when we got out of the field here. But again, really beefy, giant animal. Reminds me of if the old Flintstones, intro where the rack of ribs is dropped on his car. It's like that size, And so this is representing what's the state of giant ichthyosaurs at the very end of the Triassic period, just before this mass extinction event. And then everything changes. So once we get into the Jurassic period after the mass extinction, we have big ichthyosaurs. They're not small. This is Temnodontosaurus from England, and it's somewhere between, somewhere around 20 to 22, 23 feet long, so not small. And one of the first fossils that Mary Anning found. Really, really cool animal. And I think the photo of Neil and his family posing at the Natural History Museum is next to one of these Temnodontosaurus fossils. This exact one, yeah, in fact. So, and there's some unusual ones that have shorter snouts but really big teeth for eating big prey. And they're big, we're getting close to 10 meters, but 10 meters is nowhere close to the Triassic things that were 15 to 20 meters long. And this persists through the Jurassic, and eventually even these sort of 7 to 10 meter long animals disappear from the fossil record. So this is a really curious thing here. We've got all these giant ichthyosaurs through the Triassic, many of which are here in Nevada, and then for some reason these giant ichthyosaurs go extinct at the end Triassic mass extinction, And while some other ichthyosaurs get big, they never get this big again. And so, of course, that's what we wonder is, why did this happen? Well, we're still trying to figure it out, but here are sort of our best guesses at the moment. It turns out that, being a big predator requires lots of resources. You have to eat a lot of food. And so in a mass extinction event, a lot of your prey goes extinct as well. And so it's hard to survive when you're a really big animal. When you're much smaller, you don't have to eat as much. And so it's a little bit easier to survive if you're flexible in what you can eat. But it's really hard to eat enough when you're a really giant predator. And this seems to suggest there was a fundamental change in the structure of these ecosystems because ichthyosaurs never get this big again after the Triassic. And perhaps that's because there's other types of marine reptiles living in the ocean in the Jurassic period, things like plesiosaurs, that may have been taking away some of these roles that ichthyosaurs previously occupied. And so this is one of the things I think is super exciting about the Nevada fossil record of ichthyosaurs, is that we can get at these really big questions that we're interested in as paleontologists by putting together this story from all these amazing fossils that are preserved here. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Neil to sort of summarize and draw it to a close.
I'm back. This part will be short, I promise. So really, I just hope that you take away from this that the history and record of ichthyosaurs in Nevada is just remarkably broad and diverse, rich, spans millions of years. It's a meme, right? It's like, oh, you like ichthyosaurs? Name every ichthyosaur. But it's not just the ichthyosaur is the state fossil of Nevada. This is a whole group of animals that had many different species. Some were small, some were big. They had different evolutionary trajectories. They filled different roles in ancient ecosystems. They really are a remarkable, complex group of animals that we have a lot of questions about, and at least some of those answers are likely to come from this state. So again, I'm so excited to continue my work here with Randy. Just to kind of put that all into a little bow, yeah, it's just you guys are living right here at ground zero, so congratulations. They're across many different parts of the state. They belong to many species. Some were small, some were big, and there's this interesting story that we still don't quite understand about how they got so big and then why they downsized after that. It's going to keep us trying to figure this out for probably many years to come. But beyond just the coolness of the ichthyosaurs, they were real, genuine living animals connected to their ecosystems, right? They played a role. They were the predators of some animals. Maybe they were prey to other animals. And so in understanding ichthyosaurs, we're trying to better understand our whole planet and the history of our planet and ocean ecosystems. And at a time when many marine species are highly imperiled and having declining numbers, and we're nervous about the state of ecosystems across the planet, but especially in the oceans, it's never been more important to try to understand this history. And so that's what we're up to. So stay tuned, I guess. And I opened with acknowledgments, so I won't go through all of these, but again, many people helped along the way, funding sources, et cetera. But thank you so much, and happy to take questions. Yeah. I think there's a mic that's going to come around from Caitlin, so I'll let her.
Thank you for both of you, and as a fellow NAU geology grad, I'm happy to meet you. So what caused the end Triassic extinction event? Can you elaborate?
Yeah. So it's not the only mass extinction to actually have a cause like this. It was caused by these giant volcanic eruptions that we call flood basalt eruptions that put a huge amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere in a very, very short time. When I say short time, I'm talking geologically, so we're talking about tens of thousands of years, but tripling the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in a few thousand years, and then add sulfur dioxide and stuff like that. And So we have very good geologic records of this, and these eruptions were happening where North America, Europe, and North Africa were just starting to split apart into the separate continents. And so you got these giant, and when I say giant eruptions, we're not talking about like individual volcanoes. Think about like if you've seen some of the footage of the latest eruptions in Iceland, where it's these fissures with curtains of lava, just like that, but 1,000 times larger, and happening for thousands of years. And so that not only caused runaway global warming, but it also caused what Neil mentioned, ocean anoxia, so where you get dead zones in the ocean with no oxygen, and a lot of other knock-on effects.
So with how you found the young versus the adult bodies, does that imply that they gave live birth, or how does that work?
So yeah, and this is something that had been known prior to our work, but ichthyosaurs did give live birth, and in fact, in some remarkable specimens from Germany, they're preserved with the young animal actually exiting the birth canal from the adult. So like there's never been a clearer piece of fossil evidence for live birth than that specimen. So this is consistent with what we kind of have thought before about ichthyosaurs. That said, there's a lot that we don't know about sort of did they acquire that after they moved into so I didn't even point this out, but these animals are descended from land reptiles that would have been living on land. So is that live birth an adaptation that they acquired after they moved into the ocean? Did they inherit it from their ancestors? There's all kinds of interesting questions there. Yeah. No eggs.
One thing that folks, isn't necessarily widely known, but lizards today, there's over 100 different instances of lizards separately evolving live birth. So it looks like for reptiles, it's relatively easy to evolve live birth. Yeah.
Great talk.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask if you, at the Berlin site, if you ever found any food where their stomach should be.
So gut contents is something we really would like to have because it would really answer questions about the role that they played in their ecosystem. We haven't found any direct gut contents yet, although other species from other places around the world have, and so it's certainly possible. So we continue to hope and look. And Charles Camp suggested that he had one specimen that he thought had some fish bones in it. So again, we're hopeful that we might find more, but we're still looking.
So I think that's...
Repeat the question. Thank you.
Sure thing. Yeah, that one's about did we ever find any preserved food in the body cavity of the ichthyosaurs? And we have not, but yeah.
I find that curious because at least some octopus, if not all, will go to the bottom of the sea, give birth, and then stay there for like a year, starve to death, and die there. And I wonder if something like that is happening.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I guess I did allude to the fact that then we see something similar with whales too. And again, sorry to repeat, it was just that some animals engage in fasting related to giving birth, and so maybe we're getting a signal of that here as well. It'd be cool to look into that more. Yeah.
And then especially if you're finding large ones there, even more so, that they would starve first and die there.
Yep.
Hello. I want to say you guys gave a good presentation.
Thanks.
And the question I have is, have the fossilized skin, or at least the skin impression of these animals, been discovered?
So the question was about fossilized skin, and is that preserved with ichthyosaurs? And the answer is yes in many other places in the world, and we have yet to find any fossilized skin, to my knowledge, here in Nevada. But there are other places. So again, something we can expect to maybe find in the future if we get lucky with the right conditions. Yeah.
And another question I have is, have they managed to determine what the true color of these animals were based off of those specimens?
Do you want to take it?
Yeah, my understanding is, at least for a couple, they have. So And using a similar way to how we know feathered dinosaurs were certain colors. So in scales and feathers, you get these little microscopic structures called melanosomes, and they actually are what cause the color we see visibly. And so the original color is not preserved, but by measuring the size and orientation of those melanosomes and comparing them to modern ones, we can reconstruct what colors. And my understanding, Neil maybe knows more, but that we actually see that these marine reptiles had counter shading just like modern ocean-going animals have, both whales and sharks and things like that, with a light underbelly and a dark top.
And just to tag team on that really quick, and again, the question was about, does color ever preserve in these fossils? Growing up, every single dinosaur book I had said, well, we'll just never know what color they were. There's no chance, and we're never going to find that out. And then lo and behold, we started to figure it out. So, I mean, it's one of the really exciting things about this science, like I said, is things that we think there's just no way we'll ever know that. Like, yeah, maybe 10, 20 years we will.
I've got 2 questions. First, in the sites globally, do you see the same evidence for birthing sites, or do you find more like other large critters, diverse sites?
So this question was about, are there other sort of analogous sites where you find maybe a possible birthing site for ichthyosaurs elsewhere? There have been a handful of other places where people have speculated or offered that as an explanation, but it really hasn't been studied systematically, so someone really needs to do that and trying to figure out if there are other similar places that match what we see here. Yeah.
And when do they disappear from the rock record, and is there any hypothesis on a driver for that?
Yeah, so they disappear. The question was, when do ichthyosaurs disappear from the fossil record? They disappear in the middle of the Cretaceous, about 95 million years ago. Don't quote me on the exact number, but
you're close.
But it's really cool because it is tied to another climate event. It's something with the very long name called Oceanic Anoxic Event 2. But basically, this is another sudden climate change event, probably caused by volcanic eruptions, that caused sort of a mini mass extinction in the ocean. So we don't see any evidence of mass extinction on land, but it does seem to have caused an extinction event in the ocean. Many invertebrate animals, shelly animals, but also ichthyosaurs. And traditionally, the story was that ichthyosaurs were already on the decline by this time, but new discoveries suggest actually they were still doing pretty well. But during the late Jurassic and the Cretaceous, what we do see is they're very specialized for very deep environments. You get these animals that have some of the proportionally largest eyes ever for seeing in these really murky depths. And that may have been part of the reason they went extinct, because those lower, deeper zones of the ocean seem to have been more affected by this extinction event.
First of all, I want to thank you guys for trying to untangle what the hell was happening 200 to 250 million years in this planet and things too. And
not fully succeeding, but we tried.
No, I said trying. No, but it's really cool. You talked, it makes a lot of sense, I think, about, why. First, I also want to make a comment. I think it's really cool. Nevada has such a long range of big-ass ichthyosaurs, too, but that's pretty cool. But on the beginning end of this thing, and why things got so big so quickly, what do you think the Permian extinction had to do with maybe this massive growth pattern that we don't see in modern science?
Yeah, so the question is sort of like, why did ichthyosaurs get really big really fast, maybe? And as Tom was alluding to there's the biggest mass extinction event of all time occurred right before ichthyosaurs first appear in the fossil record. And in fact, that's actually the time where we get apparently multiple land animals moving from the land into the oceans, which whales would do much later on. But these are the very first things to figure that out. And so it is appealing to think that maybe that mass extinction event paved the way, kind of like reset marine ecosystems and opened up new opportunities. And so in that recovery from the mass extinction event, that there was this runaway growth spurt. There's a lot of sort of questions about exactly why that would have happened, and so it's hard to know, but it certainly seems like more than just a coincidence that it's after this major mass extinction event. Yeah.
Folks, that's all we have time for this evening, but thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to Neil and Randy
Thank you.
for being
Thanks,
here.
everybody.
Thank you.